Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Alix Pearlstein. As you may know, Alix Pearlstein is an artist. She works in video, installation, and performance. In the words of someone who was writing in Bomb magazine, she describes a crucial and primary visual arena in which familiar competitions, seductions, vanities, and judgments are both the subject and object of scrutiny. Her work's been widely exhibited, including solo exhibitions at the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts, which I just saw a few weeks ago. Great show. Ballroom Marfa in Marfa, Texas, the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, the Kitchen here in New York City, MIT's List Visual Arts Center in Boston, or Cambridge rather, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. She's represented by On Stella Rays here in New York on the Lower East Side. Her performances have been seen at the Park Avenue Armory and Salon 94 here in New York. Her works have been included in many group shows, including Whitechapel in London, Parasite in Hong Kong, the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, California, SMAC in Ghent, Belgium, the Whitney Museum of American Art here in New York, the Philadelphia ICA, the Biennale de Lyon in France, and the Museum of Modern Art. She's doing a project later this year for Miami Basel's public sector performances. She's received lots of grants, including the Foundation for Contemporary Arts in 2011, and she serves on the Board of Governors of Skowhegan. She has a Bachelor's of Science from Cornell and an MFA from SUNY Purchase, and she's taught at Bard, Yale, UCLA, and NYU, and has been teaching here in the MFA Fine Arts program since 2009. Please join me in welcoming Alix Pearlstein.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to focus on just a few projects tonight and jump around a bit in between. And I'm going to start right in with a project called The Drawing Lesson. It's from 2012. And this is an installation shot from a show that was at Ballroom Marfa last summer, in summer 2013, rather. A couple of years ago, I was in Turin, and I went to the Museo Castello di Rivoli, which is a beautiful museum that has a lot of Arte Povera work. And afterwards, I was looking around at more artists associated with Arte Povera, and I came across this piece by Giulio Paolini. It's not a super well-known piece, but something about it really struck me. The title of the piece is 3 by 3. And I just found myself thinking about it quite a lot, and I was struck by the strangeness of this particular configuration, the triangulation between the figure of the artist, who's drawing, has a pad in his drawing, and the relationship between that figure and the model facing him and the observer kind of off to the side, looking at the side of his face. That sculpture by Paolini was actually based on this piece by Chardin titled The Drawing Lesson, and I borrowed the title from the Chardin for my piece. Kind of at the core of my work has been an interest in activating the relationship between the camera, the viewer, and the subject, kind of getting inside that relationship. The subject I'm referring to is usually the actor in my work, and I'll be elaborating on this. I'd started thinking about how these concerns were akin to those of portraiture, and how that's been latent in the discussion surrounding performance, and performance work, particularly that deals with the gaze. So just thinking about the idea of a portrait and how the subject is usually looking right at the portrait artist, who is in turn really looking at that person, scrutinizing them to discover something, an insight into their essence. These kinds of handed down ideas about what a portrait means and could be But there was something in it that I thought I needed to think about more in relation to the way that I was working. I'm going to start this video, which is 7 minutes. In thinking again about the triangulated configuration between the artist, model, and observer, for this piece, I took that relationship as a starting point to complicate those roles between observer and observed, and expanded upon it, multiplied it like a relay into a range of configurations. So the camera, again, which is on a dolly, circles each group 3 times. And I was thinking about the camera tracing kind of freehand circles like a drawing exercise. So there's no track. The track would be visible if there were a track. So each time the camera is circling, it's a little different. For the first round, the actors were directed to face each other. For the second round, they turned their gaze subtly towards the camera. And for the third round, they turned their gaze towards the camera for a more intense and sustained hold. These head turns, which are turns that are independent of the body, are actually based on a technique called spotting, which is used in ballet for maintaining your balance and your focus when you're performing a turn or a spin or any kind of turn or spin or pirouette in ballet. I think about in this piece that the choreography of the camera and that relationship between this kind of spotting and turning is kind of integral part of the like choreography and structure of the whole piece. Also, there's a bright light which is attached directly to the camera, so that each time the camera gets close to a person, they're more brightly lit, almost blown out, to further emphasize the camera's position and path and presence. This is an installation shot of the drawing lesson, which you just saw on the right, and on the left, a piece called Moves in the Field. These 2 pieces were made in conjunction with each other. Often within one project that I do, there's one piece that's very structured. So in this project, it was the drawing lesson. And another that responds to that structure and by definition then has to be made after the structured piece. It kind of responds to it by unraveling it and addressing related themes, but through a much more open, looser, more porous form. So this is another installation shot of Moves in the Field. I'm going to show this video, but I'm going to talk through much of it, most of it. And I'm going to get back to some specifics about this piece, but kind of back up first with some more general remarks about my work. In an essay by Jonathan Wally, From Objecthood to Subject Matter, Yvonne Rainer's Transition from Dance to Film, the writer remarks that the basic material of dance, and here I'm going to substitute the word performance, but the basic material of performance, the human body, the person, was resistant to the goals of minimalism. Yvonne Rainer reached a point as choreographer when she could no longer divorce the bodies of her dancers from their emotional lives, their psychological states, their appearance, their presence, their histories or narratives. And at that point, she turned to film, where she felt she could address all of that kind of messy human material, which, according to her kind of value system, had no place in dance, in postmodern dance at that time. Those values were organized by her in a manifesto that she called the No Manifesto, which I'm sure she didn't mean to be super dogmatic, but to be taken with a grain of salt even then. But I'm going to read the No Manifesto, which is Yvonne Rainer's No Manifesto from 1965. No to spectacle, no to virtuosity, no to transformations and magic and make-believe, no to glamour and transcendency of the star image, no to the heroic, no to the anti-heroic, no to trash imagery, no to involvement of performer or spectator, no to style, no to camp, no to seduction of spectator by the wiles of the performer, no to eccentricity, no to moving or being moved. So again, a kind of central impetus behind much of my recent work is a desire to activate this space, which I think of or try to make as into an affective space between the camera, the viewer, and the subject. A range of kind of factors and assumptions combine to pressure that objective, and one is an attempt to generate that point of resistance that Rayner describes by inserting acting into a space in which an expectation has been set up for performance. So performance as opposed to acting, which I think of as two very related but distinct modes. So the expectation may be stimulated by conditions that resemble strategies of minimalism and conceptual art. But to define my terms by acting, I mean that there's an illusion of an inner life beyond that of the actors, a psychology, a character or backstory, motivation, and emotionalism, while performance implies that the performer suggests that they are not pretending. So I began working with performance-based video in the early 90s, a long time ago, after working primarily with sculpture and installation for a number of years. And most often I was performing myself in my pieces and also incorporating some other like artist friends who performed. At one point, I met a couple of people who were professional actors and included them in a piece, not thinking it was going to be that different than bringing in some of the other friends that I was including in my works, but it was. There was a kind of pressure or tension around them there wasn't around me or the rest of the kind of artist friends who performed. And it almost seemed like they didn't fit or belong in these kinds of spaces that I was creating that were based on kind of conceptual art thinking. They brought a psychology, an emotion, a sense of drama and life that was something kind of visible beyond the frame of the video. That was in 1997, and pretty much since then, I've mostly taken myself out of my work and started working with professional actors. And so all the people you're seeing here are professional actors who work in a range of like experimental theater, traditional theater, television, film. Some also have a dance background, but they're primarily actors. And I became really interested in the actor as a subject and also just what they could do, the skill set, that professional skill set. And particularly interested in setting off their subjectivity as actors within my work, so that, you know, in a way that it becomes disjunctive within the context of the piece. I want to direct the viewer's attention towards the person as an actor, and also their skills, their relationship to acting, their style of acting, and the codes of performance that they're working with. I often use kind of direct address, breaking the fourth wall, and very specific relationship to the gaze and how that's used within the context of each piece. Also always trying to make the presence of the camera really felt by foregrounding it through a range of different strategies like the use of repetition, choreographed patterns of movement and very insistent shooting structures so that the structure becomes very apparent in relation to where the camera is at any time. The sound of the dolly wheels, as in the last piece, or a light that's right on the camera can contribute to reiterating that path. And for me, it's a way to position the viewer in like a direct relationship to the camera so that they're implicated in the action, maybe more involved. Some pieces, not this one, but some other pieces, the cameras are visible and perform as kind of participants in the piece. I've worked in a number of pieces with simultaneity and real-time shooting strategies where the mechanics of the process becomes a parallel theme in the piece. And that's often come out of an interest in sustaining the duration of a single shot, which relates to me to live performance. Which is something I'm interested in kind of merging with a very mediated space. I'm kind of always interested in the way a live performance is really different from one performance to the next, that there's never a definitive version. But I always feel really frustrated in the conditions of a live performance, which are generally static, that you're confined to a static frame. So kind of wrestling with this conflict between live and mediated has informed a lot of the approaches that I just mentioned. And an attempt to kind of define a space between theater and film where they each act like each other. Many of my pieces are set in this kind of space, which is a seamless cyclorama. Also other kinds of white cube, black boxes, loft or warehouse spaces that are in some ways seem kind of blank or neutral, but are also really loaded with references to their defunct use value as art, photography, film or dance studios, galleries, and theaters. So often those uses are kind of subtexts within the pieces. I often utilize the legacies of minimalism, structuralist film, and postmodern dance, but to a large extent as a pretext. So I'm often working, particularly in this piece, I would say, with structures that may resemble the kind of task-based actions of early performance art and postmodern dance, but with different objectives. So in this piece, Moves in the Field, I was asking kind of what or how little or how much does it take to instigate the basic elements of narrative or human drama, conflict, relationships, and the emergence of a protagonist. And once these suggestions start to take shape, how quickly do they fall apart? The camera's on a Steadicam. It was directed to move freely between and through the actors and to be very Steadicam-ish. So kind of swooping in and out and changing pace and intermittently panning the white wall of the cyclorama. Again, in this piece, a light is attached directly to the camera. So each time the camera comes close to a person, they become much more brightly lit, again with the interest to kind of foreground the camera's proximity and presence and constantly reiterate the presence of the camera. The actors were given a core set of directions, and with the intention for these to trigger a range of interactions, but the directions sound very simple, and these were to walk, pause, turn, look at each other, and look at the camera. So this gets back to this idea of a kind of task-based instructions that may have come out of a kind of postmodern dance piece. But the key directions here to look at each other and to look at the camera generate a really decisive shift towards a potential for narrative and drama and psychology. Other directions related specifically to gaze, to a relationship between an internal and external focus for the actors, and relating to each other and the space. There's also an allowance for a range of performance registers or styles to kind of coexist and brush up against each other. I also, for this piece, had prepared some personalized directions and a list of like extra actions based on what I anticipated would occur. And for the most part, these things did occur without me having to instigate them. But a few of them I did, which included one woman who changes to a black dress and runs at the camera. In one scene, one actor remains in the same spot, and another actor was asked if she could produce a tear. And she wasn't able to, but she got very sad. And that sort of stayed with her the whole time. At the end, there's also a brief moment of fog. So when I was looking over this material the other day, I started thinking about this piece from 2003, so going back like 10 years. This is a piece called Forsaken, and I was just thinking about the differences and similarities between a narrative emerging out of a prescribed set of conditions and a prescribed narrative. So this piece and a number of others I made at this time were more scripted deliberately to. I'm gonna play a short excerpt. It's 3 minutes. To kind of outline the kinds of group relationships that formed in the piece I just showed, but here kind of outlined from the start. This is the last 3 minutes of this piece, which is 10 minutes long. Oh, I was also thinking, since it's an election night, this was kind of about a person who achieves power and is then like deposed by the people that had supported him. So. So a project from 2009 called Talents is comprised of 2 single-channel pieces, Talent and Finale. I came upon a clip from the Broadway show A Chorus Line while I was looking online at a blog that one of the actors who was in that last piece, his name is James Urbaniak, the kind of skinny guy with the green shirt. He had a blog for a while where he described his audition experiences, which were, funny and harrowing. That day, I had been thinking about kind of checking in with Dan Graham's performance Audience Mirror, that's a still from that piece on the right. So I watched that clip from A Chorus Line and then Dan Graham piece back to back, and it was weird because I realized that they were both from 1975. They both set the performer in front of a mirrored wall, kind of with the intention to implicate the viewer and to bring out that self-consciousness of the viewer. A A Chorus Line, if you don't know it, was the longest running show on Broadway. I don't know if it still is, but it was for a really long time. And the narrative is an audition that resembles a kind of group therapy session. Performance Audience Mirror is I think of as a really seminal performance art piece, and it examines the audience-performer relationship from kind of every subjective and objective angle. So while they both set the performer in front of a mirror, were both made in the same year and had these sort of similarities, Performance Audience Mirror is geared towards a goal of extreme kind of distancing and alienation, while A Chorus Line is to the same degree directed towards extreme empathy. You're just supposed to be like feeling for these actors who are struggling. This is a production still from Talent, and another one. And these pieces are from 2009. I'm going to play the video of Talent and just say a few things while it's starting. So broadly working off of these two references of A Chorus Line and Performance Audience Mirror, I was thinking about kind of exposing a range of positions between performance and acting, as I am always thinking about, and also objectifying the actor, objectifying their relationship to an audience, kind of objectifying their need for attention or not. Thinking also about, again, their kind of life and experience of the performer, and kind of question of what entertainment is, what makes entertainment. So this piece, and I'm going to show a clip of the other piece that's part of this project afterwards, are both set in a dance studio that doubles as a performance and rehearsal venue. It's in Williamsburg, and it's cheap, and a lot of small dance and theater groups use it for rehearsal. It was important to me that the piece was set in a space that really embodied that struggle in some way. Through the window, especially at night, you can see the kind of bright lights of the city and the Empire State Building. There's something about that as well in terms of the location that seems important to me. So the camera's continuously tracking back and forth, paralleling a mirrored wall. And that's me in the background, kind of multitasking as director and performing the director and the other crew who are doing the same. I often give actors the direction to think of the camera as the viewer. And in this case, that was something that was really emphasized a lot, to constantly think of the camera as the viewer and how much attention, to keep asking how much attention you need from it. Following are a series of video stills from the piece that was the other part of this project called Finale. This particular actor, he kind of couldn't shake the association to A Chorus Line, and I had to kind of convince him to participate in the piece. He thought that whole association to A Chorus Line for him was painful, and I think I remember saying, like, oh, you know, that's not really going to be part of it. My work is so much more abstract than that. But ultimately, it was really part of it. And so he kind of had this, like, demise throughout this next piece, kind of psychological demise. And I'm just going to show a short clip, a 2-minute clip from Finale, which is another 10-minute piece. So this piece was made after. It's okay. After Talents, and the actors were asked to kind of pass through, respond, or refer to the actions they had performed earlier in the day. So just to pick up on one thing, which would be this use of kind of real-time shooting strategies and integrating the presence of the camera and the director into the mechanics of the piece. I'm going to go through just a couple of projects where, just with images, where that was kind of worked out in different ways. This is an installation shot from a show that was in Ireland of a two-channel piece called Distance. It's from 2006. In this piece, two opposing cameras track a continuous path from one end of the space to the other, passing each other to trade places. So the two channels are two simultaneous, continuous takes. And this is a production still from a piece called After the Fall, which was the central work for an exhibition that was at the Kitchen in 2008. It was shown in their gallery space on the second floor, but was filmed in the first floor theater. So the first floor theater is a black box theater, and actually the second floor, which is a gallery space, which was originally a black box theater. And at this time, it seemed to me that the black box was just the inversion of these kind of white void spaces that I'd been working with. You know, kind of neutral on the one hand, but also loaded with these associations to, primarily to experimental theater. So in this piece, I was thinking about reversing the conditions of theater in the round through a shooting structure in which these four simultaneous cameras continuously circle the space. They spiral into the center and then turn around to circle in the opposite direction. So at this point, they're kind of spiraling in. And this is an installation shot. So the viewer is at the center of four screens. And this is a view of what you would have seen from that shot. And then this is the point at which the cameras have spirals into the center, turned around and kind of inverted the structure. It's a piece that I think most closely, and I'm not going to show a clip of it because it's a four-channel piece, but it's the piece I think in which I was able to kind of work out this conflict between the live and the mediated, in which theater acts like film and film acts like theater. So this is a view of what would have been seen in that shot, in that moment. This is an installation shot from a project called The Dark Pavement from 2013. It was filmed in and around the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center. And in this piece, I made a series of works that kind of responded to the site of the institution, which is in a way very ordinary and typical of a lot of institutions around this country, but also had unique features like this window that was cut into the back of the gallery wall. It's like a permanent kind of focal point of the main gallery. This is a still from another part of this project where the actors were positioned and kind of occupying this like little garden that was really in the parking lot, which people usually just walk by or drive by. And then there was a cellar that the public never sees, where another part of the piece was filmed. This is an installation shot from a project called The Park from this past year. A group of actors were filmed in the sculpture park of the Decor Museum, in and around the sculptures there, and kind of was thinking about them alternately like connecting and kind of disconnect between the way that people experience kind of art in public places. So there was this kind of sense of coexistence or disconnection. This is another installation shot. And just another image from this project that's a Solowit piece in the foreground. So I've worked, I'm sort of going through this series of images, picking out in my mind, and I'll just talk a little bit more about it. This idea of the pose or stillness. Something I think about in terms of like a real-time still, so a kind of still, staged, posed action in which nothing happens, but there's time, there's duration. And it's something I've been working with for a long time. So those are some of the more recent pieces in which that was used in various ways. And this is a piece from 1998, so that's me. This is like one of the last pieces I performed in. Like the figure of the runner, and then there's a painting and a small girl there, cut out of magazines, like actual two-dimensional magazines, and the cutouts were placed right in front of the camera, so it creates this illusion through depth of field that I'm in scale and in space with them. And in this piece, there was like a series of attempts to make a connection and have an interaction or action with these static two-dimensional figures. And this is another piece that used the same approach. Although in this piece kind of complicated by a dressed live man and a two-dimensional cutout of a naked woman. So it's a piece from 2000 called Two Women. This is an image from a piece called Still. So kind of dealing with these staged moments where, that are almost like posed photographs. And that's a picture of me on the right before a ballet recital. So this has been occupying me for a long time. I came upon this photo recently going through lots of stuff, and I'd always remembered it because I was the only one in the picture who was like in position. And it's like, what are those little girls doing? Get in position. You're wearing a tutu, you know, but yeah, so, you know, it was just a reminder of like these things that preoccupy us for a long time have roots often in something just from your life or something personal. This is a still from a Vito Acconci piece from 1971 called Centers. And this is a still from a piece of mine called Pause from 1997. So the pieces from like back in the 90s that I made were usually shown on those kind of like old school boxy black monitors. I always find it a little weird to project them. These are images from an advertising campaign for Calvin Klein, a Calvin Klein fragrance. And in the video, I'm performing a series of real-time stills or a series of poses that are culled from lots of references to art and advertising, including the Acconci piece and this ad, film, theater, all kinds of performance, anything that seemed to relate in some way to performance. The real-time stills are occasionally disrupted by the action of finding the pose, getting into the pose. This is an installation shot from, it's the most recent piece I've made. It's called Monogram. It was from a show at Samson Gallery in Boston this past summer. And I'm not sure how I'm doing. I'm doing okay on time, I think. I'm going to show this video, which is 10 minutes. I'm just going to read the directions that I had prepared for this piece while it's playing, and I'll just turn down the volume after and I can start to take questions since it's running a little bit over an hour now. I actually think I'm not going to read those directions, but I'll just show a clip of this and then stop. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop here and see if you have questions. Yeah, there are some actors that I've worked with repeatedly, and you know, it's a form of collaboration. You know, there's like a language that we share, and whenever I'm thinking of a piece, you know, there are a few actors that I've worked with repeatedly. I'm often thinking of them in it, I think, you know, now, after a certain amount of time has passed, there's something else that I wouldn't have anticipated, like they are getting older, and you know, I think about a lot of, you know, filmmakers who work with the same actors over and over again, and there's some sense of being able for me to like get there faster with actors I've worked with before, and then I always try to bring in new people as well. But they're still actors. They're not like art, you know, they're not doing what we do generally. And they're still bringing, I think, that skill set and that consciousness. So yeah, there's some of them have worked with other artists as well. You know, it's like this, I mean, some artists, some actors I've worked with have, you know, seem to have like a sort of affinity or understanding for, you know, things that are more like art. And some not. And some it's kind of like a very foreign, but yeah, I can't say that I could divide them based on that in terms of what they bring necessarily. It really varies. Yeah, I think I talked a little bit, maybe not that much, about making an allowance for very different performance styles within that piece. And it's something I've come up against in other pieces and tried to direct towards, you know, a kind of standard. But in this piece, I decided to allow it to see if that would kind of generate some of the interactions or tensions that I anticipated might occur from this sort of set of instructions. And I know the actor is the guy with black hair. So one of the things, like one of the questions I had posed to myself for this piece was, will a protagonist emerge? And right away, he emerged that way as a protagonist. And you know, I had like a whole list of things that I anticipated would happen or that I hoped would happen, and he instigated almost all of them. So I definitely had a choice at one point because he realized that he was in a sort of more like emotional state than everybody else, and you know, wondered about it, and I made a choice to allow it because he, for the sort of disjunctiveness of it, and for, you know, him kind of bringing all these, teasing out all this sort of drama that I felt it sort of needed that bounce. Well, in some of these pieces, there's a structure that I'm going in with where there's already a duration to the structure. So if the camera's panning from left to right, when it gets to the right, it's done. In other pieces, it's more open, and it's a matter of, like in that piece, I was wanting to see some kind of progression or some sense of climax. Again, like some idea out of all of this sort of abstraction, in a way, for something to start to seem like a narrative, for there to be a sense of development and progression. So it's just a different criteria for each piece. So the black and white photograph, the black and white headshot, is something that was used in this original Broadway show, Chorus Line. And back then, in the 70s, people had black and white headshots. Now, for the most part, actors have colored headshots, and so some of the actors didn't have black and white ones. This is like a non-answer. But one of them didn't have one. So this is one of those moments where I was like, okay, so she has a whole bunch of them, just, you know, 2 people doubled on headshots. And I knew this was one of those moments where it's like you can read all this meaning into it. But it was also a moment where I was just like, no, we're just going to use those headshots. And it's going to like seem too complicated, but it doesn't really mean anything, but you could read something. Yeah, yeah. It was practical, but I knew it was asking for trouble. But sometimes I don't want everything to be that clear, you know? So it was like, yes, it could be misread, but I thought that was a risk I was willing to take for it not to be like everything was, you know, just the way I planned it. I mean, I think it's all kind of like self-reflective and self-reflexive at the same time. So I think it's all about either making that connection or not. You know, for me, it's a perfectly reasonable or interesting response to look at one of these pieces and just think, I don't like her, you know, and why? And, you know, she's annoying me. I think, you know, that kind of like reflecting on how you respond to people, how you respond to people's behaviors when they cross a line into something that seems transgressive or, you know, interesting as something in life or interesting as something that's like deliberately artificial or self-conscious. You know, I find that's just for me, I think that's just an interesting place to be as a viewer and to, you know, be in constantly reminded of how we make assumptions and how we respond and who we connect to and how we communicate. Or when I first started working with video, I went around to galleries and I noted how much time I spent looking at things. And I thought about that a lot. And then after a while, I noticed that that changed my sense of what kind of time I would devote to looking at something that took time would be. And then I stopped thinking about that at all. So I don't think about that at all. I'm very deliberately interested in making pieces that exist in galleries or museums or art, particularly art spaces, because of the flexibility of being able to walk in and out for one. And also, I'm really interested in just the spatial relationship. So, I mean, it's something I didn't talk about. Obviously, this is a lecture. The screen is this size, you know. But I do think it's different to see these pieces in an installation setting and to be sort of one-on-one in the space. But you know, whether somebody spends 15 seconds and turns on their heel or stays the whole time and watches something 3 times, I mean, I don't mean to sound like I don't care. You know, I want people to watch my work, obviously, but you know, I just think it's that's the setting that I think these belong in, and that kind of liberty to do what you will with it is kind of fine with me. Yeah, I was going to read the directions for this piece. It was funny when it came to like doing a press release for this last piece. I just couldn't imagine like writing about all the stuff that I talked about tonight. And I thought that the directions themselves spoke to all of those points, and maybe it's just where I find myself now in relation to these ideas, you know, like these ideas that I ended up like working with for years. And after at a certain point, something, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I'm going to get back to it. I don't think I'd be that excited by just a set of rules and reading them. I'm interested in seeing people doing things in time and space.
Are the rules present at the galleries that they're
Yeah, they were really, I mean, not to pick on the word, but to me they're directions, not rules, and I think it's different, but they were actually sent out with the press release, sent out with the announcement, they were there. Yeah, so it was, so that text was part of that piece. Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. I think I do both, and I think I'm interested in both. So the piece that the longer piece that I showed in the beginning, there was a set of directions, but then I also directed while the piece was being filmed. So it wasn't like, here are these directions, go and let's see what happens, because it's actually kind of more goal-oriented than that. So within, like seeing what people did with the directions then provoked, intentions for me to try to kind of tease out of them more specifically. Yeah, that piece, each shot was about 3 to 4 minutes, and then I edited them together so that it appeared seamless. But some other pieces are continuous takes, so that's what I was talking about like simultaneous kind of real-time shooting strategies, this sort of continuity. So that's a little bit sort of edited together continuity. It's something I've been sort of deliberately juxtaposing within one project, a piece that's very structured with a piece that is not. And I think working with, or maybe having a kind of affinity or interest in things that are very, very clearly structured has also gotten me to then want to see what it's like when something's messy or feels like it's kind of on the verge of falling apart and not even quite coalescing into something. So I may have kind of mentioned this but not gone too much into depth about it, but the pieces that are these kind of looser or where you can't quite grasp what the structure is are always made directly after the piece that's very structured. So the piece called Finale, where the camera's circling, I asked the actors, it was made after the piece that preceded it, which was called Talent, which was these sort of structured series of actions. And I asked the actors for that piece to think about what they'd done, and it was a long day and they were tired and it had gone from being daylight to night, the mood changed. I'd asked them to think about what they'd done, all the different actions, and to kind of pass through those and refer to them in their own time, in their own rhythm. And in some way, I only showed an excerpt of that piece. In some way, that piece is more satisfying to me than the other one, but it couldn't have been made without it. So it's something I have found really interesting to work through, to kind of like push out to kind of 2 different forms within one project. Yeah, I think maybe I did make a piece recently that's kind of in the middle like that, and it feels a little indecisive to me, but it's a good thing to think about. I usually have kind of like a test shoot, like even maybe a month in advance of the shoot, and then sometimes I have rehearsal beforehand, but sometimes not so much. Sometimes that's kind of worked out through a series of like repeating the same shot over and over again. But yeah, it just varies. It's not anything like the way that a live theater piece would be rehearsed for weeks and weeks. But there is generally some rehearsal, even if it's only like 1 or 2 days or a few days. And that rehearsal is also me sort of figuring stuff out. So it's not just rehearsal for them, but it's like figuring out that the shooting structure is working and other things. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I see theater. I have, kind of a complicated relationship to it, but I feel related to it in a lot of ways, but I kind of feel more related to film. That's just where what I kind of love more and kind of more interested in, you know, what happens in live performance and what happens in theater. I'm much more interested in seeing what happens when that's filmed. So, yeah, so I'm in mediating that. Yeah, I think, I mean, I think it can. I think that's kind of, I think that's in there in all kinds of ways. I don't really think that using like professional actors changes that, because I think that's what they do. They represent people. Yeah, I mean, it's a little, I can speak to it more about not using myself, where I feel like I came to a limit of what I could do as a performer. So, I mean, I have a dance background and, you know, if I was performing but not dancing, my relationship to performance certainly came out of dance and movement and kind of language of gesture. And at a certain point, I hit you know, a wall with it where I can't actually, the very last thing I showed, there was this actor, Stephen Rattazzi, who's in all these pieces, standing there, like just standing there. I actually can't do that. I couldn't do that without looking really awkward. And I mean, it sounds simplistic, but it kind of, there's a real difference between, that's the difference between performing and acting to me, to just be able to stand there and engage and be present and not be, yeah, that's the difference between being, I think, having some skill as a performer or actor, whatever you want to call it, and not. It's actually really hard to do very little. So that's simply the reason for using people who have that ability. So it draws attention to something beyond them just standing there. Right when you enter this sculpture park, the Solowit is right there. So it's like a very prominent piece in that location, and I couldn't imagine sort of not working with it. So it's actually foregrounded in the beginning of each of those shots, and then it disappears. And it also just you know, made a lot of sense to me in relation to my relationship to, if I'm going to make a piece that has a relationship to sculpture, that it has this relationship to this kind of hardcore minimalist kind of structure. It's not a piece I loved or, you know, even particularly was that interested in, but it also seemed like the only way I could make a piece in this environment was to work with that piece. It's not something I'm using at all, actually. It was something that Yvonne Rainer wrote in 1965, and I think even she thought it was impossible. And well, she did think it was impossible, and that's, I kind of read it to point out how minimalism was being interpreted by people who worked with performance at that time. So that's a kind of history that I'm drawing from. And that recognition of the impossibility of that once you are working with the subjectivity of people, that was kind of a moment of like recognition for a direction for me in terms of, you know, kind of everything that I'm thinking about and working with. So yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it's really funny, actually. I didn't read it in a funny way, but it's impossible. And I think she did write something that maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago that was a kind of reappraisal of it. So I didn't talk that much about the last piece that I showed, the most recent piece which I showed a clip of, which is called Monogram. And in that piece, I was thinking about making a signature Alix Pearlstein piece. To kind of, make it as emphatically a kind of signature as possible. So there were like 3 signature actors that I've worked with repeatedly, and to me, it does that. It kind of refines all the things I've been working with for the last few years. And in doing that, I was thinking, well, is that an endpoint for a certain way of working or inquiry? And the answer is I don't know. But I don't particularly feel confined. And I didn't really make it because I felt confined. I made it because I wanted to just kind of like hone something. And I feel like this way of working combines so many different things. It's like writing and directing and people and space, location, So I never feel confined by it. I don't feel a pressure to produce a certain kind of product. I also don't feel that there's a mandate on a kind of broad way of working either. So I feel that it's fine for me to work within certain parameters for 10, 15 years, and that those will, evolve and change. But I don't feel like I have to now go make an object or something. I think there's a pressure on that right now that I'm a little suspicious of as well. So being defined by a particular kind of practice, I think is fine. And I'm suspicious of a pressure to question that, to a point where it seems like it's not acceptable. So yeah, but I did want to kind of but I have been thinking about that a lot. So if it's the question that you thought you shouldn't ask, it's actually something I've been thinking about and wanted to kind of address for myself.
So you're saying you feel pressure to break out and do work that diverges from the...
No, I don't feel that pressure, but I think a lot of people in the room do.
Oh, so
yeah, I think...
there's students that have to experiment, and if they're performance artists, they have to paint, or if they're painters, they have to make video.
Yeah. Yeah, just in the last couple of years, it seems like there's a pressure on, I think, younger artists to feel that they have to do, you can't be defined by one way of working. I mean, I question that. I do think about it as I'm making something, what scale it might be optimized at, and yeah, I do think about when something seems more cinematic. The distinction between filmmaker and video artist, I don't think is that important, but yeah, I think it's more about context. So. Is that it?